What kind of a country is Buhari handing over to the next president who will be inaugurated on May 29?
Yes, because we're doing a post-mortem on that already now, and let me get Bismarck's take on that in terms of the kind of country that we're in right now, 8 years of Buhari.
Well, I think that you cannot take it out of context. Buhari inherited a country that was frustrated because of inefficiency and, to a large extent, compromise of the system. There were interjections by COVID and other exogenous challenges. But the thing is that the Nigerian economy became more interconnected with the global economy. And therefore, the more maverick or the more isolated the Nigerian policy environment, all in the terms of economic patriotism was, the more difficult it was for Nigeria to become competitive. So there was a divergence of the goals with the strategy, and the result was suboptimal outcomes. So essentially, the economy has not performed as it should be. Quite frankly, growth was suboptimal, and the impact on the people in terms of inclusivity and all of that was less than expected. So what you're having is people whose expectations, crisis of false expectations, and people who are extremely frustrated with the outcomes. And so that even makes the achievements look pale compared to the expectations. And you can use whatever indices you want to know. You talk about the war against corruption. People do not believe that has been impactful. The economy itself has been in various, to a large extent, frustrated. And then the war against insecurity has rolled out of control. So essentially what has happened is that there was a misdiagnosis, economic misdiagnosis, and therefore the therapy was not only wrong, but was mistimed. The result is that the people are now saying, okay, we now know there's a connection between the political leadership, the ideology and philosophy of the leadership, and the economic outcomes. So that is why today's election is so pivotal and so critical to the future of this and the expectations of the people.
Well, I think that clearly we have to look at it in the context of what President Buhari pointed out as his three main focus areas as he became president. So obviously it was corruption, insecurity in the country, and of course the economy. And I think many observers will say at best it has been mixed in terms of the impact. You mentioned that insecurity is still a big issue. Although some will suggest that in 2015 there was concern about the expansion of the territory of Boko Haram. I think there's less concern about that, but now it seems the challenges have now morphed into banditry across the country, kidnapping and so forth. So clearly there has been, to some extent, some progress there, but clearly still big issues. On the economy, Nigeria has endured 2 recessions. Very unlikely that many would have expected that to happen. Some will suggest that external factors were a key reason for that, but clearly there has just been that slow growth. Many will suggest that any growth below 3% is just super suboptimal, if I can use the term. And Nigeria clearly hasn't grown more than 3%, maybe once or twice over the last 8 years. So clearly there's still a lot to be desired in terms of the economic direction of the country. And on corruption, we still continue to talk about the fact that Nigeria is an importer of refined petroleum products. We've not been able to figure that out in the last 8 years. And we know that there's this huge subsidy racket, as some people suggest, very controversial, and a lot of corruption is suggested to be involved in that process. So I guess, as you mentioned, the next president has a lot on his plate, and some even suggest that it's the worst time to be Nigeria's president. The challenges are so much. Back to the economy, clearly when you look at the balance sheet of the government right now, huge debt overhang, And the big question is, how do we navigate that?
Let me piggyback on Wale here and also talk about the fact that one of the other reasons that Nigerians were very bullish on Buhari presidency, were looking forward to, was some form of, we knew the country had structural problems with the economy. At least to some extent, people were hoping to see some change in that regard. Bismarck, what would you say has been the hallmark of, or would you say, Buhari's legacy in his time in these 8 years?
To me, let me be very clear. You see, in 2014, 2015, these problems were isolated. In other words, if you had Boko Haram attacking you, all you have to worry about is whether they will kidnap Chibok girls or whether they could actually, there be a threat to life and property in a particular area. If you had corruption, you know, it was defined, very well, clearly defined, and you had the economy in another silo. But what we've seen between 2015 and now is that the lack of security has become an economic impediment. In other words, you've seen that vandalism in the oil wells has reduced income and capacity of the government to implement. The breakdown in corruption has actually, the vested interest has destroyed economic value for the people, right? So you couldn't look at it in buckets. Now you have to look at it holistically. And failure to have an ideology which recognizes the fact that Nigeria is part of the global economy and therefore we cannot be a maverick. And the impact of being a maverick was that you would not be able to optimize the use of your resources, has come back to haunt the economy. And therefore people now see that you must be ideologically balanced and you cannot actually resort to some dogmatic expired ideas, whilst in fact the challenges you face today are for current problems. So that is where that disconnect between misdiagnosing the problem and failure to see the link between these three issues that you are trying to fight, that if you lose in one, you lose in all, right? And therefore, what has happened is that the bandits, the insecurity problem has become a bandit problem. Bandit problem has become an economic problem. The economic problem has now become a people problem and now become a political problem. So this is where we are, and there's no question about it. Can any of the leaders or whoever is going to emerge deal with this problem and see it comprehensively is the key issue. You cannot look at it in isolation and start making excuses for not performing.
Well, in a few words, what would you describe as the legacy of the Buhari administration?
You know, I would say that legacy is that trying to complete incomplete projects, i.e. the second Niger Bridge, some things, it's a good thing. Secondly, it has opened the eyes of the Nigerian public to the fact that there's a nexus between political leadership. You cannot isolate political leadership from economic outcomes, right? And thirdly, that if you do not do the right thing at the right time, you end up with the problems that you have. That is multidimensional poverty, debt, and then frustration. So, but also the Buhari administration has left the fact that the potential still exists, and all you need, or not all you need, the most important factor is that a leadership that can understand and connect all of these variables together to provide for the people.